Right. When we look on what's on the paper at the end of the conferences, it is usually disappointing in terms of what is needed to keep us on the track to, say, staying below 2 degrees temperature increases. But it does serve other important functions. One is an important function in setting the agenda in domestic and other debates. So, for instance, the EU adopted its, at the time, fairly ambitious targets for 2020 in advance of the meeting in Copenhagen in 2009. And now again, ahead of the meeting in Paris 2015, the EU has adopted fairly ambitious targets for 2030. And you could say the same about a range of other countries as well. So that's one part. The other is that the UN process has established some mechanisms and instruments that can be used to implement policies. One would be emissions trading in several countries, and also things like the Green Climate Fund, which is channeling some funding, at least, from rich to developing countries to help deal with climate change. Not on the scale intended yet, but at least it is there.
Norway announced during this session that it would double its pledge to the Green Climate Fund. Do you think that Norway is now contributing its fair share?
Well, we actually did some calculations on what Norway should contribute. Based on historical emissions, it might be as low as cutting 50% compared to 1990 baseline. If you take a more ambitious approach, looking at its capacity, it has a very high GDP per capita, it should perhaps cut as much as 600% compared to current emissions. But if you do add up what Norway is contributing in terms of the GCF, RED Plus, other initiatives, it is probably pulling a relatively fair share of its weight, at least compared to historical emissions.
A couple of weeks ago, Norway's sovereign wealth fund said it would consider divesting from some of the most polluting companies. Would you like to see it fully divest?
I think it would make financial sense. If you do believe in the UNFCCC process, there will be limitations on fossil fuels in the future. That means the value of coal is going to drop. I think it makes financial sense to withdraw from coal, and clearly there are good moral, ethical reasons for doing so as well.
Do you think that one of the options in the text at the moment is a total decarbonisation by 2050 target? Do you think something like that is, even if it were politically possible, do you think it's technically possible for countries to achieve around the world?
It is a very difficult target to achieve. It does take time to build new energy infrastructure, to come up with new technologies, and phasing out all fossil fuels by 2050 would be a very ambitious task, especially in light of the needs for increased energy supply in many developing countries.
Norway is part of the umbrella group in these negotiations. Do you think that's still a strong group, and have they negotiated well together at this COP?
It certainly is a strange collection of countries that stand for relatively different positions. I do think it functions more as an information sharing group. They do, of course, present some joint positions, but it's difficult to see what the US and Norway has in common on certain topics, such as the review of the intended nationally determined contributions.